Hello there, Ado from Resource Investment Media here. Today I want to talk about a topic that is quite relevant these days, and that is profit windfall taxes. And I've given the video the title Profit Windfall Taxes Are Bonkers. And I think that's a rather good way to summarize them. And I guess the initial question then that we have to address immediately is, why are they bonkers, and in what relevance have they become actualized in recent times? And I would first of all start by saying, whenever you introduce a tax that is sudden, it creates a precedent of unpredictability for a business and for a sector. And whenever it is hard to plan your business, it is usually a disincentive for further capital investment. And the profit windfall tax does not do anything other than merely that, create uncertainty within a sector where supply is crucial. Now, in regards to profit windfall taxes, what has happened the recent few days that perhaps have made them a hot topic? Besides America perhaps discussing to levy profit windfall taxes on the oil and gas sector, Great Britain or the United Kingdom has already done it. The UK, that today has a 19% corporate tax rate, has decided to levy a 25% profit windfall taxes on the oil and gas industry. The ruling cabinet in the United Kingdom stated that the reason for doing so was, well, they're not reinvesting it anyway, they're giving it back to their shareholders, so we might as well take the profit instead of the greedy shareholders getting it. And at initial first glance, a policy like this can seem to make sense to you. You figure, well, they'll get more taxes and they'll be able to give it to people who have to pay for higher gas bills. So in an essence, there is a reasoning behind it. There is a logic that follows, so to say. But then you start looking at it from the other side. And now imagine that you and me are running a oil and gas company, or better yet, imagine that we are investors who provide capital to the oil and gas sector. And now here comes the oil and gas company. It says to us, we have this deposit, it's in Scotland. We believe that it could generate this type of cash flow. If we make a capex investment, we could see a cash flow from this asset produced already within 2 years, and we can have a return on investment that is 30% of the invested capital. This is just a hypothetical scenario, but let's say that that scenario exists. Now you and me as an investor have to immediately think, okay, if the actual exploration project goes through and your expectation in exploration is failure simply because of the odds are stacked against you, most exploration projects do not become a producing mine or producing oil well or nat gas pipeline. So, okay, we already have the odds stacked against us in that regard. The profitability factor of 30% on invested capital over 2 years, while it might sound nice, all of a sudden now we have a scenario where we're not facing a 19% corporate tax rate. We have a 25% profit windfall tax that may or may not just be for this year. It may become more permanent, as most taxes are. They tend to become stickier than what you would think. Under that scenario, almost half of the profitability would be paid towards taxes, while we still have the exploration risk of developing this asset. Obviously, we would be, you and me as the investors here, will be very, very hesitant to provide capital to this project. And say that more investors think alike, like us, which they probably would do facing this set of logical circumstances. Well, they're likely to make the same decision, meaning this project never gets built and supply doesn't get increased. And the very problem, which is the increase of prices in the oil and gas industry, actually gets worsened and not better by the profit windfall tax. I would say that a fundamental understanding of the industry that you're taxing is always an advantage if you're in the political class, if you're a policy maker and not just a policy taker. Understanding that the oil and gas industry has had and I don't want to generalize too much, but the last 10 years in terms of stock performance and even profitability in some aspects has been lagging. They've had 10 somewhat rough years. Now that doesn't apply to everyone, but it does apply to a lot of projects. The first one that comes to mind is the US shale industry. that despite having negative cash flow, was just going on year after year and kind of costing investors a lot of money. A lot of people lost a lot of money on the on the shale industry in the US. So when that is the circumstances that people have been kind of carrying a negative cash flow and a negative stock performance for a period of 5 to 10 years, and now all of a sudden they see the table turn and they get some profits, it's not, I would say it's not unimaginable if you put yourself in the position of these individuals that you would like a payday, especially considering that you've waited for one for perhaps 10 years. So now when you get a payday and you actually want to get some dividends, well, the government is saying, well, we're not going to let you get that much dividends. We're actually going to increase the tax. Now, once again, to go back to basic fundamental economics, do you think this makes the management and the shareholders more or less likely to invest in further development of resources? Now all of a sudden they've seen that despite hardships for 10 years, if we actually get a bit of a tailwind instead of headwind, all of a sudden government is there immediately to partake in a very, very large part of that. That disincentivizes new production. Now, what else that has happened, I would say the recent year or two, has perhaps disincentivized production in the oil and gas industry? Well, first of all, the cost of capital. A lot of people don't want to lend the money, don't want to buy their bonds because they're not environmentally friendly, meaning the cost of capital has gone up for the oil and gas industry. So they've actually been under investing roughly, I would believe it's $1 billion a day in new development, which has created this immense supply deficit that we have, simply because capital has not been readily available to them, not just for the reason that they're not considered ESG friendly, but you even had, I believe Biden in his, how do you express it in my English? Sometimes you get stuck. Basically, when he was running for president in the campaign, he expressed that we could not completely exclude criminal charges against CEOs of oil and gas companies because of the damage that they had done to the planet. So obviously, if you're a shareholder, if you want to be a part of the board of directors or the management teams within these companies, whenever you hear a potential president candidate who ended up becoming the president candidate putting out a statement like that, it's going to make you think twice before you continue your career or investment or any of those types of things within that industry. You're going to be very, very hesitant to further your career within that field. So from that aspect, we have yet another factor that will worsen supply. There's not a politically stable environment. There's not a capital-friendly environment. And now, when you have a turn in profitability, you're immediately facing profit windfall taxes. Now, I guess all of these three policies are almost perfectly designed to make the initial problem even worse, which is that new supply will not come online and you will most likely see further increases in oil and gas prices. Okay, now, why is this happening? And here it gets kind of tricky because it's hard to give an explanation other than financial illiteracy. And that may sound very rough and very harsh. I would say, unfortunately, that most people today are somewhat financially illiterate. And unfortunately, that statistic does not better when you enter the fields of politics. It almost at times seems to get worse. So you have decision makers who are making active decisions that will worsen the supply situation when their actual job and goal would perhaps be to better the supply situation. They're acting counterproductively to the goals at sight, meaning you could almost only explain that by two parameters, either financial literacy or deliberate misconduct of behavior. I would hope that it is financial literacy, because that is easier to correct than I guess purposefully bad behavior. So when you summarize these things around the oil and gas industry, you realize, first of all, one, we're in for some hard times, folks. For people who are expecting the oil and gas price to go down merely on demand destruction, I think that may be a challenge, simply because supply seems to also be deteriorating at as quick pace as demand deterioration. So even if you see a fall in prices, it may not be as, I should say, sharp as some people would like to see or hope to see. And I guess a second conclusion would be that profit windfall taxes in general make things merely worse. They make investors within that field very hesitant to invest. They make investors within your jurisdiction very, very hesitant to invest, because to go back to the example of when you and me are running an investment fund here and I guess providing capital, we didn't merely have the Scottish exploration project on our table. Perhaps we got one that was in, Kazakhstan, just as an example. And there we were told, oh no, it's a flat tax rate, 10%. The permitting process is just 3 months. It's very straightforward. And you can make 40-50% on your money in return on capital. Why on God's green earth would we choose to put our capital into the Scottish project when the circumstances were so much more favorable for the Kazakh project? So countries, and I guess leaders within these countries, their financial literacy does not merely curtail to understanding supply and demand constructions. They seem to also not understand that they are in competition with other jurisdictions for capital. And that further alleviates the fact that we're probably in for some hard times, and that while there is an uncertainty in the oil and gas industry regarding how much of the profit these firms will be allowed to keep because of politically sensitive environments, I guess that's the best way to express it, the fact that they will be exceptionally profitable for the mere fact that new supply is not coming in seems to be a given. And that also does make that sector something that is interesting for the investor and the speculator, if he can manage, I guess, political risk and perhaps find projects that aren't well marketed yet. So my conclusion of it would be that profit windfall taxes are definitely bonkers, and that the population who live under jurisdictions that allow them are unfortunately the biggest losers in this scenario, not the biggest winners. So if you enjoyed this video, do not hesitate a single second to like and subscribe. Cheers.